Hello everyone. Today I'll show you how I carve a small bowl from start to finish. Collecting the wood for my carving is a skill in itself. As I don't enjoy cutting live trees, I always look for freshly fallen ones. The perfect time to do so is when I go for a small hike. In this case, to a small forest around Prague. I found this branch next to the trail. It appeared that it fell only recently. Not rotten, and I couldn't see any holes from bugs. I always look for a piece that doesn't touch the ground, as it's easier for the wood to stay dry, slowing the rotting process and making it harder for bugs and worms to eat through the wood. A piece without knots will make it easier for me to carve a smooth bowl with less struggle further on in the carving process. Usually, I collect the wood days and weeks before I start carving. So I make sure to put it in a place that will keep it humid, preventing the wood from cracking. Here I use a piece of cloth, which is good for a day or two, but if I want to keep it for longer, I would put it in a half-closed plastic bag with wooden chips surrounding the wood. When carving wet or green wood, as some call it, I tend not to use the heart of the wood. The hard fibers are more condensed than the body, which affects the time it takes for the wood to dry and shrink, causing cracks in the piece. That's why I split the wood in half, carving away the heart and avoiding any knots. Using the axe when carving the rough shape of the bowl can be quite dangerous, especially with small bowls and trays. I myself have a lot more to practice and hone my axing technique, so I'm extra careful, slowly removing the parts of the wood that require more force to carve, which is mainly the end grain parts. I want to remind you, as I said in my last narrated video, that I don't see myself as a teacher or a professional carver. I learned this skill by myself, without attending any classes or courses. My skill came from years of trial and error, and I'm here to share my process. So if you're interested in trying it yourself, I would strongly recommend watching more videos about how to safely use sharp tools, to ensure this craft is a source of enjoyment and meditation, not unnecessary injuries. Going back to the bow. Instead of using the axe on the outline, I use a saw. I feel it's much safer and a more accurate tool to make sure I don't miss and damage my markings. You probably noticed I hold the wood in a place with a clamp, connected to a big log of wood I use as an axe block. It's quite comfortable when I want to cut or carve with big tools, knowing I might hit the surface beneath. I simply carved a big enough hole in the log to fit my clamp. I never saw this elsewhere before, so if you want to see this setup closely, I can make a separate video. Just leave a comment below. Starting to carve the general shape, I use the Mora 120 carving knife. The price for this knife is quite comfortable and I've used it for several years by now. I highly recommend it for anyone who wants to start. When I start, I focus on two main things: carving the outline of the bowl and making sure the bottom is flat and big enough for it to be stable. It took me some time to understand how important it is to make sure I have a flat bottom. Many times I noticed only when it was too late that I don't have a big enough flat surface to use for the foot, forcing me to make a compromise, having a shape I don't really like, and a bowl that is less stable. So once I learned I should first focus on the base, it gave me much more freedom and understanding on how much material I actually have to work with. I use a big piece of 80 grit sandpaper on a flat surface, making sure it doesn't move and connect it to the surface, which allows me to use much more power so I could reach a flat facet faster. You might have noticed before that I used a pencil compass and then an ink pen on top. The reason for that is that the pencil markings tend to get smudged while holding the wood and carving. I find it quite annoying to remove the grey pencil tone from the wood, especially when I reach the end piece, so I try to avoid using pencil on wood. And if I do, I wash my hands before reaching the last finishing touches, making sure I have a nice clean piece for me to oil. But this is a much further step. We will get to that later. For now, I remove the material between the foot and the top. I do this with a Mora knife, but it could be done with many different types of knives, chisels and gouges. I choose to use it mainly for keeping it simple. In my future videos, I plan on using and showing all types of tools I own. Now, before moving forward to carving the inside of the bowl, I stated that I focus on two things: making a flat base and carving the outline. So I gave a closer look and found a small crack on the edge. Just like the base, I want to make sure I have an outline I'm satisfied with. This outline will later on guide me on how deep I'll carve and how much material I want to remove. So you can imagine how frustrating it can be finding a crack after carving out the bowl and making a finer shape. Usually this leads me to remove the crack, making a weird outline that I didn't intend to. After I have a general foot and outline I'm satisfied with, I can move to the inside of the bowl. Here I'm using the Mora 164 hook knife. I like to use this one as it's quite intuitive in my hand. I have control on each stroke, and I can easily change the position of the knife and the wood according to what I need. Now, if I would carve a slightly bigger bowl, I would have probably used my vise to hold the wood and a big gouge to carve the inside. The gouge has much more power, but less control and agility, especially when I'm holding the piece of wood while carving. When carving a bowl, there is a simple guideline I follow when I choose the direction of the carving. I like to divide the bowl into quarters. I draw one line with the direction of the fibers and one against. Each quarter has its own direction. So if I look at the bowl having the grain in a vertical way, I will carve from the top or bottom to the horizontal line and stop there. This way, I make sure I don't enter the grain in a way that would split the wood. In most cases, you would just feel the knife getting stuck, not managing to carve the wood smoothly. I can also carve on the horizontal line to either direction. It might be a bit hard to understand, but I wouldn't worry about it. In my opinion, the best way to learn which direction you should carve is by trying, listening to the wood and the feeling of your hand. If you have a sharp tool and a proper piece of wood, the carving should feel smooth. And once you feel stuck or a need to put more force, it usually means the direction of the carving should change. After I roughly carved the inside, I switch my mindset to the finishing stages. What it means is that from now on, I'll start being much more careful, slowly removing wood from outside and inside, always looking and reflecting on the shape and thickness. When I reflect on the shape and lines, I follow my intuition. The way I see it, this skill is very helpful when wanting to have a fluent creative session, and it can be honed and learned. I believe we all can observe and see beauty in shapes and lines. With the same basic observation skill, we can also identify what disturbs our eyes, what makes us uncomfortable. Now, this doesn't mean you can create beautiful lines and shapes just by observing. But I believe that every time we take action according to this observation, we can improve this skill. In my experience, by doing it again and again, each time reflecting with observation, taking intuitive action and repeating this process, I've improved my eye. I never went to any design school or took any courses, and I'm convinced anyone can hone it. To make my bowl more stable, I carve and hollow the foot, making it easier to completely flatten it in the end. It's important to remember that when carving wet wood, it will change its shape when drying. So it might seem flat when it's fresh, but coming back and flattening the foot once the wood is completely dry is necessary for a stable bowl. To carve a smooth transition from the foot to the top, I use the tip of the knife, which gives me a narrow blade that can be turned and controlled more easily, especially in tight corners. When I started working with both the Mora 120 and Mora 164, I used them in the most intuitive basic way, holding the knife with the blade up, as most carvers would. But once I started experimenting with different tools, I found out that there are many ways to hold and work with them, each way giving different control and flexibility. It always feels not intuitive and comfortable in the beginning, but I learned through time that the hands learn and adjust, which gave me the confidence to try and hold my tools in many weird ways that I haven't seen anyone using. For example, holding the straight knife upside down can let me carve a corner of the bowl while holding the wood in a comfortable way. Though I always try to remember that each time I try a new technique, it means I do not yet know the limitations and dangers that can occur. That's why it's important to be extra careful when trying something new. Being slow, focused, and conscious of each stroke and movement is the safest way to approach it. So the bowl is almost finished. And just before oiling, I will use sandpaper to make a smooth surface and to open the pores for the oil to enter properly. I start with 80 grit sandpaper and move to 320. If I want to keep the knife markings and textures, I would only use the 320 sandpaper just for the oil finish. I use walnut oil on most of my carvings. I like it because it's natural. I can buy it in nature shops and it's not too expensive. I used linseed oil for a while before trying the walnut, and it's also a nice option. After covering the whole bowl, I wipe the excess oil and let it dry. On my last video, someone commented and suggested that I should oil the wood several times with a week between each coat, saying that it helps in making a more durable layer of oil once it hardens. This sounds for me that it could actually make a difference, so I think I will try it and see if it changes anything. Getting comments from some of you that have knowledge to share is a great tool for me to learn. So if you have any more suggestions, please leave a comment and we can all learn together. So, thank you for watching until now. I really enjoyed carving this bowl and making this narrated video. And I'm quite excited to try different projects and carvings. Thank you again for watching. Keep creating, and I'll see you next time.